G'day mates, Jacaro Turo here, and on this channel I focus on Australian Aboriginal languages, cultures, Aboriginal history, and so on. And I have been doing quite a number of videos about verbs in Australian Aboriginal languages, predominantly about verbs in Pama-Nyungan languages. And as you can see, this is another video about verbs. So, in Pama-Nyungan languages, verbs are constructed like this. We first have a root or stem. There may be a conjugation marker, maybe, hence the parentheses. We have tense aspect and or mood marking. And last, there may be person marking. So maybe as well, hence parentheses here too. But this is actually fairly common. Person marking. And this is the first video, as it so happens, about person marking in Australian Aboriginal languages. And as you can see here, we find this in all non-Pama-Nyungan languages of Australia's top end. These are also Australia's prefixing languages, where person markers often are placed before the root or stem as prefixes. We also find it in at least 70 Pama-Nyungan languages, and verbal person marking in Australia is found in two big areas. One stretching down from the top end to central Australia and into the Western Desert and outwards towards the west coast. And the other area is found in southeasternmost Australia. But there are also a sprinkling of languages in other places that show this feature. There are a few on the Cape York Peninsula, for example. But we need to note here that when we say more than 70, there were a number of Pama-Nyungan languages that were spoken at one point and that disappeared quite early on in colonial times, and for which we have no or next to no information about grammar. So there may have been more languages in Australia like this. So verbal person marking, what is it? Perhaps we should start by defining what it is. Well, people who are familiar with more conservative Indo-European languages, more conservative than the Scandinavian languages anyway, like my native Swedish, they will be familiar with the fact that the person of the subject is marked on the verb. So in German, for example, we have ich habe, du hast, es, sie hat. I have, you have, he, she, it has. So the sounds at the end mark the person. So that's what this is all about. So in Pama-Nyungan languages then, person markers occur last. They often consist of one syllable only, but not invariably. We have an exception here in Nyangumarta. And while then more conservative Indo-European languages mark the subject, the person of the subject In Australia, it's much more common to find marking of the person of the subject and the person of the direct object. So the subject, the one who is acting or experiencing something in intransitive clauses, the direct object, the one who is influenced, affected by what the subject is doing, in transitive clauses. So this is much more common. This occurs in all non-Pama-Nyungan languages and in many of these as well. And there are also languages that mark other constituents of the clause on the verb, other than the subject and the direct object. We may find a dative participant or a benefactive one. And I think I will have reason to come back to this in future videos. But as illustrated by this example from Nyangumarta, which I found in Sharp's 2004 grammar, usually only 2 person markers are allowed on the verb in any given language and in any given clause. So actually Nyangumarta is one of those languages that marks the person of the subject and the person of the direct object. And here we have an example in both the northern and the southern dialect. In this case, the difference isn't very big. So in the northern dialect, we get widani laindi. And in the southern dialect, widanna laindi. So actually the only difference is one vowel here. So hit, verb root, non-future tense, ni or na, here. And then we have 2 person markers. Lai then, disyllabic, first person dual exclusive subject. So first person dual exclusive. What does this mean? Well, it means me, the one who is speaking, and someone else, but not you who are listening. That's first person dual exclusive. And then we have second person singular object marking, ndi. And this means we 2 hit you. Now, we might note that something peculiar happens in a smaller number of languages. You see person markers occur on the verb in most languages, and indeed this is common around the world, that we find person marking on verbs. It's found in different places. But in some places these person markers aren't placed on the verb. Like in Warlpiri in Central Australia, there is an auxiliary that is placed before the verb, and the auxiliary takes the person markers. And I found this example in Cliff Goddard's Yankunytjatjara grammar from 1985. Yankunytjatjara is a Western Desert dialect, and in Western Desert dialects, person markers are taken either by the first word of a clause or by the final word of the first phrase. So here we have a phrase that consists of 2 words, wadi, man, and juda, many. and means many men. This is the subject, which we can tell from the fact that it takes ergative marking, ngu. And we also have person marking here. First person dual accusative. So wadi jurangulinya. And the verb nyango does not take any person markers. So nyango, see past tense. So I find this a bit peculiar, I have to say. And in these languages then, we cannot talk about verbal person marking or markers, since the person markers would seem to have migrated, so to speak. So Dixon, in his 2002 book, talks about bound pronouns instead, and bound pronoun markers, which in most languages are bound to the verb, but in some languages, in fact, aren't. Yes, I think I will have reason to come back to this and make more videos. But this will be all for now. So, see you later.